be a one-state solution where Palestinians and Israelis live together in harmony, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, so we agree on that ideal.
Yeah, so I think I said that it would be ideal if it's a Palestinian state under whom anyone is welcome to go and live, etc.
Yeah.
And then you said that, of course, that's ideal, but in terms of practicality, some people think the two-state solution is more practical and ideal. And then I think it just deteriorates from there in the sense that just recently, I mean, you got Zipia Tolvi, she's, I think, the foreign diplomat, like the diplomat of Israel. She knocked it completely on the head and said, no, we're not entertaining that.
Yeah, no, Israel. So now what you've got is still, just to reiterate, we agree on the idea. One state, okay? The two states, all I'm arguing is that a two-state solution increases the protection of the Palestinian people. If they get statehood, they won't get as exploited by Israel as they have been. And it gives them a platform from which they can negotiate into a one-state solution. Therefore, surely, as a way of getting closer to the ideal, it's a more practical way of doing it.
I mean,
because when you've got two people who are...
I'm waiting for him to finish.
Because the sun just comes in and comes out. When I came in, now I look like a prat.
No, you don't.
No,
you
like
highly decorated.
No, you know when I had the scarf on really tight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So surely the two tribes need a cooling off period. Yeah. I don't think they could coexist in a one-state solution without a huge amount of violence and exploitation from maybe both sides. Yeah. So if they need a cooling off period, aren't they better off having a cooling off period for a few years at least in a two-state situation rather than the Palestinians still being stateless refugees who are being exploited by Israel?
Tony, you know when it comes to cooling off period, just one recent example rather than going into kind of history and stuff like that. A recent example you probably had when they were told to move from the north to the south. Yeah, and they said in the south you're going to be safe. That was, they said, look, that's your cooling off period, we're just going to deal in the north.
That's not what I mean by cooling off.
No, but what I'm saying is that people these are, Israel as a state has shown that they don't accept a cooling off period in any form of, however you fathom it, in the sense that you want to move people from the north to the south, you bomb them as they're going south. When they're in the south, you bomb them even when they're in the south, even when there's a ceasefire, which is the definition of a cooling off period, as one form of it. You're still bombing them. There's ITV caught a small example of somebody that had no weapons, had a white flag. That person was no threat whatsoever.
I think we're going to agree that what Israel is doing at the moment is appalling and it should stop.
No, but what I'm saying is that this is just to kind of flesh out the point that you said about a cooling off period, because there's an assumption there that Israel will be okay and will be loyal to the idea of a cooling off period. And what I'm telling you is that we have enough instances where Israel hasn't been loyal to this idea.
Not be, but again, we're defining the idea.
Ideally, of course.
Okay, ideally, with an understanding of human psychology, if all of these people now were put into one state next week, I think whoever was the majority would exploit the minority. I think if there was an Israeli majority, they would exploit the Palestinians, and I suspect that the Palestinians have had such an appalling treatment that they couldn't contain their anger if they were the majority. So either way, it wouldn't serve either side.
I don't think they would. I think that's what people are fearful that they would. But I don't think they would.
Well, I hope you're right. But, okay, even if you're right and they wouldn't, I could imagine that the Israelis would be sufficiently paranoid that they wouldn't believe that the Palestinians could be that merciful and accommodating. Yeah? So just to accommodate the Israeli paranoia, pragmatically, it would still seem sensible to keep them apart for a bit, where they're not killing each other for a while. And if you're going to keep them apart for a bit, two-state solution, a temporary two-state solution, serves the interests of the Palestinian people better than still being a refugee camp. Because for 70 years, NATO, the United Nations, has said that Palestinians should have a nation. And we've been appalling in not backing it up because we've let America veto this again and again and again.
Just last week,
But internationally, for the first time, it seems the public opinion, even in America, is moving against Israel. You've got a 20-to-1 death rate consistently between Palestinians and Israelis. people are waking up to the fact that the Israeli narrative really isn't morally convincing. It really isn't. They're using numerous different strategies to obfuscate the truth, and I'd love to sit here and break down arguments against Israel till the cows come home. But before I get to do that, I'm always called a Zionist because I still believe in the two-state solution. And that's only because I need to know the answer to a question. And you're into ethics, so tell me. What should the statute of limitations be on this kind of stuff? Because it's a universal question we need to ask about in international law. And 1948 is 75 years ago. Now, at what point does conquest become legitimate ownership? Because if it was 1948, I'd just be going, Israel is behaving appallingly, the Nakba and all of that, and I wouldn't support a state of Israel in 1948. But if I'm mindful of the statute of limitations, and if I'm mindful of the fact that most of the people in this conflict didn't start it, they weren't around in 1948, they've inherited a bad situation from their forefathers, I think all of those people have rights that should be recognised, and that's the only real argument for the state of Israel I can see, is the statute of limitations. So what do you think?
I can say that when it comes to the two-state solution, this was something even agreed by a specific party of the Palestinians. They had no issues, and that was the direction that the talks were being led to. That was, I think, even with Yasser Arafat, and I mean, this was something that, yeah, all that sort of stuff did take place, and but I think ultimately the goal, and this again is a theory people posit, is Israel was never interested in the two-state solution. They've constantly put either roadblocks ahead of it, they've violated it, and the settlements are clearly a violation of a two-state solution. And here you have somebody that's not willing to play by the rules. So we can quote statutes, but how and what do you do against somebody that's a rogue, belligerent state?
Well, I think hopefully you recognise if Israel is, say, 7 million people, Netanyahu to me is despicable. Not every Israeli is in favour of Netanyahu. There's a spectrum of opinion within Israel. And yesterday, last week, Adnan debated a Jewish woman who was terrific. They had a very constructive discussion where she said within the Jewish diaspora and within Israel, the tide of opinion is turning more and more against hardliners like Netanyahu and towards something like a two-state or even a one-state solution. In fact, she was in favour of a one-state solution. That tide of public opinion is really growing because Israel has shamed itself for its recent behaviour. I'm not saying that it's a simple position for them because they got attacked and it is genuinely complicated, but nonetheless I can't take a 20-to-1 death ratio consistently of Israelis to Palestinians or the way Palestinians have been treated. Now I think Netanyahu wants more radical opposition. He would far prefer Hamas, who approach this as a religious conflict, than the PLO, who approached it as a secular real estate dispute. Yeah? So he's encouraged, I think, he's encouraged Hamas because he knows they will alienate so much of the international community that he can then use that for his one-state solution, which is basically the Nakba part to it. It's kicking out the rest of the Palestinians. So I think Hamas are playing into his hands by framing it within a political framework. If you frame it within a secular framework, you'd have a much stronger platform, and I think international opinion then would fall against Israel, even in America, and would really gain some traction.
The thing is, there's both. There's that secular element, you've got the religion, but just to kind of add to the point that you mentioned, just last week there was an interview of Mehdi Hassan with an ex-Prime Minister of Israel that said the very thing that you said, just in case somebody thinks it's conspiracy theory that Netanyahu is trying to prop up Hamas, that he prefers Hamas. No, this is actually a reality.
Well, I'm gambling. When I first heard the idea, I thought it was a conspiracy theory. And then the more I heard about it, did you watch the debate on Lex Fridman with Finkelstein, 4 of them, for about 5 hours?
Yeah, I don't know what Destiny was doing there, but so I'd say 3 of them.
I'll always defend the underdog. I know they said all he knows is Wikipedia, but you can make good points without having huge amounts of facts, yeah? Nonetheless, in that, they all did seem to agree.
You can, but like for him, maybe another YouTuber would have been great.
I think, he was the weakest. I thought the best guy was
he was the weakest link.
To Finkelstein. What was his name? The guy who was with Finkelstein.
I don't know, but
he
was.
And it was a good discussion. 5 hours. It was constructive. Anyway, they all seem to agree that when Israel felt most vulnerable was when they said, the Palestinians tried a peace offensive, which was being ironic because normally it's a military offensive. So what Israel didn't want, I think, around about the time of Oslo, was the idea that the Palestinians might become peaceful. The more extremists like Netanyahu,
exactly.
they want hostility, and they want the most extreme form of hostility to rationalize how they can create their one state, which is to eject everyone. So it's difficult.
It's actually been said in the Israeli parliament that I've actually got the quote where they're saying that Hamas is actually preferred. It's preferred because Hamas will catalyze them getting and usurping more land. Hamas is the perfect opposition for them because you probably had what have majority of the discussions, especially on mainstream media, been geared towards. I mean, from the get-go, whether it's Piers Morgan, whether it's CNN, it all started with, do you condemn Hamas? So the whole conversation...
I think that's a reasonable question, but I think equally you should ask with it, do you condemn the IDF?
But my point is the fact that this whole thing has been centered around this group that they are trying to prop up, that they are trying to make it seem like the center of the argument, when the center of the argument is occupation. Settler colonial occupation. Like that's the crux of the issue. Like you said, there's an extremist party over there. You got the IDF, you got extremists like Netanyahu, you've got the extremist who he's had to Ben Gavir, who's an
the keys. Let me get umbrellas just in case.
Is it going to rain?
Should I
Okay.
leave it?
I've got a brolly. Does that help? We can share a brolly.
It's up to you. Yeah, if you want to.
Yeah, just in case.
Yeah. So yeah, even when it comes to Ben Gavir, who had a picture of a known terrorist who killed innocent Palestinians, and he had a framed picture of him in his in his office or in his house. So there's a lot of ridiculous stuff. But how the media has made it about an organization when Hamas isn't even the only, like, when we're talking about Palestinian resistance, Hamas is a faction of that. They're not the only ones that are fighting.
I get it. So in order to help me and other people who are laymen to frame it, my assumption is I should start by looking at 1948, yeah? I know the history goes back before 1948, but 1948 seems to be the pivot point for this, and that's because that's when the State of Israel was declared. Is that a reasonable foundational point to start from?
I think
it's not October the 7th. October the 7th is not the beginning of this story.
I would say before 1947, because it didn't happen at 1947. And if Israel has been given a state in 1947, that doesn't mean that's when it starts. It means that is a what do they call it?
Catalyst?
No, like a milestone.
Okay.
That's a milestone, but in order to reach that milestone, you will have had to traverse something. Like things don't happen in a vacuum. So similarly, for you to start at 1947 when they've been given a state...
could we say post-war, 45 to 48? That seems to be where...
starting before, when, for example, I think if you are to talk about the whole thing, you talk about the whole thing. Talk about when the Palestinians were called the Philistines. Talk about when... Because...
Now, how far back are we going? Because I'm really into the statute of limitations, and when I see Netanyahu and Ben Shapiro...
I say pre-Canaanite time.
Okay, now maybe we can have a proper disagreement. Okay. When Ben Shapiro and Netanyahu give their explanation about how we need to frame the conflict, their openers are, if you want to understand the conflict, you've got to go back 3,000 years. And my eyes immediately go, no, I don't. No, I do not. Because what I'm looking for... Do you know Umar Suleiman?
I know Umar, yeah.
Okay, who was again on Lutz Friedman. I thought he was very eloquent on the Palestinian fight. He's in favour of a two-state solution, and he's condemned the international law. He said we need international laws to adjudicate this. Yeah? If we'd had international laws with teeth that treated everybody equally, we wouldn't be in this.
Yeah.
So the international community should be ashamed of itself.
Yes.
So you need a framing device for international laws which can work.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can do that based on arguments that go back 3,000 years. It's just impossible. Yeah?
Shall I tell you why he may suggest 3,000 years? You don't have to agree with him or disagree with him. It's the fact that they deny Palestinians were in that land and that there were evidences for that. That's why then we'd have to go back at that time and talk about the Philistines, talk about evidence of markings and archaeological evidence and coins, etc., that do evidence that the Palestinians were there, that they have been mentioned in the text when they're trying to wipe us from history, sort of
So
thing.
whatever happened to the group of people we never met 3,000 years ago, how does that change the actual ethics of what happened to people in 1948 who are still alive today who were displaced? I'm interested in the living far more than the dead. So although I want to learn the history of what happened in the past, the statute of limitations I think we should embrace internationally is if you're alive and you committed a crime, you're answerable for the crime. And if you're alive and you were abused, then you should be compensated. Yeah? So for example, if you were kicked out of your house in 1948 and you're still alive, you should get it back. Once you're dead, you move into a second ethical category. Because at that point you've been judged by God, and once you've been judged by God, it's a distinct line that we can understand objectively. Are you alive or dead? If alive, still answerable. So I think if we could internationally use that as a statute of limitations, a primary statute of limitations, still informed by the history. We need to know the history. You can go back as far as you can go back 3,000 years if you want, but that's dead history. At some point the past becomes the past, and I think it's when the individual dies.
And that's obviously it's up to you, isn't it? It's up to you where you want to start, but I just gave you the kind of reasoning behind why some people would want to go before and would want to start. You can start when you want. It's a choice that you have.
Well, not all starting points are equal. I'm pitching very much the living dead thing, and I think when Shapiro and Netanyahu
so you're saying that the border that was there at that time, that's the border that we need to be working towards.